Broadcasting Live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. So it's been an eventful last week and weekend, etc. We had some great things going on in our neck of the woods, but I'll go ahead and listen to what you've got going on. Let's share a few things with the audience and tell them what's happening in the world of eschatology and preterism, etc. on your end.
Well, I received a phone call from a gentleman from New Jersey. He's been listening to both you and me, watching us on video on YouTube. He's one of those guys that said he was raised in an amillennial background, but he said he just simply decided that he had to make up his own mind about eschatology. And he said, I threw away every commentator, not literally, but metaphorically. I just laid them all aside. I wanted to make up my own mind. And he said, I just simply did not feel like what I was seeing in the commentaries made any sense. And he said, I kept running into all of these statements in the New Testament that just didn't make sense. They did not agree with what I was reading in the commentaries, hearing from the pulpits. And he said, I literally stumbled onto Dr. Bell and Dr. Preston. And he said, it's really, really been an exciting adventure. And he made note and, told about an awful lot of the changes that have taken place in his own personal life. And he actually intends to come to the Preterist Pilgrim Weekend this July. Lord willing, nothing happens. So he's very, very excited about that. And he says he's sharing with other people there in New Jersey. He didn't tell me exactly specifically what town he's in, but he certainly said that he's having fun sharing what he's learning with other people and getting their reactions, seeing their interest grow. And what have you. So that's just another one of those really fascinating, really encouraging type of contacts that we continue to make on almost a daily basis. What I wanted to know, William, I know that you had another debate with Hebrew Israelite guys last Friday night, so I wanted you to share how that went with our audience.
Okay, surely. And I looked for Rich Eckhart to be in the audience somewhere, but he wasn't.
Well, I'll be.
And you know what you know what that's all about. But at any rate, we had a debate with Sakari, who is, I think, one of the third largest in the Hebrew Israelite community. There's several camps, as they call them. And I had tried to get a debate with these guys before. Elvin Israel had debated them once. Shortly after he had contacted me, he had a debate kind of early on with him when he was just kind of getting his feet wet and everything. And so they wanted to discuss with me, and I sent them some protocol after watching the debate, and how they handled everything and, sought to control. And this was a much worse job of, controlling and being overbearing than anything that, you've seen. And they refused to engage in a discussion where we had, an equal amount of time, where we would have, a moderator, and we would have equal amount of people, so that it's not, one-sided or two, doubling up on one, et cetera. And they absolutely refused that, wouldn't even correspond to it. I offered them an opportunity to tweak the guidelines, which were reasonable. We were going to send each other written questions, et cetera, the basic debate protocol. And so they refused that. And then after a while, they come back and, ask for a discussion. So I knew that the debate was not going to happen if we did not, accept their rules or their non-rules, and so I decided to go ahead and do it. And once I found out that both of them, because it's always two guys with them, that they were going to do that, I just said, well, Elvin, why don't you just come along since you, have some background in their view, why don't you come along and then we'll talk to them. So if anything comes up that, you have some insights on, you can address that as well. So we did, and we spoke with them last Friday night. And very early on, after it got started, after they finished their questions, and actually when they started their questions, they hit us with about 3 questions, and I answered them very quickly. And, one question was something about, if does Christ have dominion or something? If he has dominion, why are these nations at such and such? And so I just gave him very quickly Ephesians chapter 1 to show that Christ had dominion not only in the present age, but also in the age to come, and that everything had been placed under his feet. So when I did that, and a couple of other passages that I answered pretty much the same way, Romans 8, we are more than conquerors, etc., and nothing present in life or death, because they thought death was, one of the things that ruled over us, and etc. So after I gave those, then they started hedging on everything. They started cutting us off, wouldn't let us finish speaking, screaming, shouting. They even, shouted a few expletives during the debate. And then we got them to Zechariah 14. Elvin took them to Zechariah 14, and they contradicted themselves. One of them said that Zechariah 14, 1 and 2 referred to 70 A.D. The other one said verse 3 referred to 70 A.D. So they couldn't make up their mind there. And then when they finished that, I asked them, I said, okay, well, tell us where the chapter divides, since it, doesn't, since you take the first part. I said, give us the specific place where it divides and why it divides. Well, they never would tell us why. So I took them over to Matthew 24 and started walking them through. I said, now, since you acknowledge that 1 and 2 is the destruction of Jerusalem, and everything that follows is from 3 on is the future coming of Christ. I said, so then that would mean Matthew 24 and the rest of Zechariah all talked about the same subject. And so they agreed to that. And so I started taking a verse. I took a verse, probably started somewhere around verse 29 or something, and walked them down, and they admitted that all of those were second coming verses. And so when I got to verse 34, I said, do you agree that this text says, this generation will not pass till all these things take place? And they said, yes. I said, okay, thank you very much.
Yep. Debate's over.
And then they wanted to try to explain it, but I told them, I said, well, thank you. It's, welcome to preterism. And after that, they just got, really, really just, unruly. And a few more things, came up in the discussion. But some of the people, and I know a couple of people were out there listening, and Elvin shared with me that, someone had even stated, well, I can see why these guys won't let William Bell speak. And he said, this guy is pretty knowledgeable. And so some of that was going on. And then this was the most interesting highlight from the debate. It was what happened after the debate. I got a call from a guy who listened to the debate. He listened to you some as well. And he's a Hebrew Israelite. He called me up yesterday, and we spoke for like 2 to 2.5 hours. He had questions that he wanted answered, and I answered all of his questions. And by the time the conversation was over, and even before it was over, he said, man, I'm a full preterist. He says, I agree with what you guys are saying. I can see it, and I just needed to get some questions answered. And he says, and I'm on board. He said, and then I'm going to go back and meet with some of the congregants, some of the people that I work with, and I'm going to give them your number and have them call you so you can get some questions answered. So we're looking forward to that. And that's basically what I was looking for in the debate, was to find, a few good people who wanted to study.
Sure. And
he said, look, I'm a Berean. I'm looking for truth. And he says, don't get sidetracked. And I'm saying this for the audience benefit. He said, don't get sidetracked by some of these guys out there with their megaphones and microphones shouting on the street and hate speech. He said, some of us are truly, seriously interested in knowing the truth. And he said, and we'll investigate it, and if it's true, we'll accept it. And so he said, just basically count us in, and we want to study together and work together in the future. So, and Elvin had people like that, and as a matter of fact, I have a lady from that same discussion that was on a call last night that I did, and she wants to have a discussion with me today, and I think Elvin had a discussion with another lady today. I mean, she wants to have a discussion tomorrow, and another lady had one with him today. So we already have some results out of that discussion, and Elvin says they're now doing damage control. They're over there talking about prophecy and other things.
Well, you mentioned something there that I constantly am asked by people. They said, well, do you really expect to convert the guy you're debating? And my answer to that invariably is no. Absolutely, I do not. I have had instances in which I have heard that years after a debate that I had, for instance, some years ago, one of the fellows that was in the debate actually said that he was now a full preterist. He's never contacted me and told me that, but a person that corresponded with him met him personally face to face, talked to him about the debate, asked him his impression of the debate, and he said, well, I've got to tell you something. He said, I've never been turned inside out so thoroughly as Don Preston did in that debate. And he said, as a result of that, I went back home, I started studying, and I'm now a preterist. So it does happen, but it's rare. But what I tell people, obviously, I'd love to convert the guy that I'm debating, but I'm after the people in the audience, which is precisely what you were saying there a moment ago. You're after the people that are willing to look past all of the blow, all of the bluster, all of the name-calling. They want to know the truth. And that has happened in debate after debate after debate. Look, I still hear from people occasionally who watch my debates with Thomas Ice and who tell me, wow, this is incredible. This has opened my eyes. I was noticing last night, I was on my YouTube just doing a little bit of surfing around. I love to watch animal videos on YouTube.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. I love it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever watched this, but there's a guy, there are a couple of guys. One guy raises mink for the purpose of killing rats, and the other guy raises terriers. Those are
I've seen the mink one. Where they are all under the garage and everything, pulling the rats out and stuff. Yeah.
I'm telling you, that's absolutely hilarious. Well, anyway, I was on there watching some of that, and I happened on the side of my YouTube, it showed that one of my debates that I had with Dr. Michael Brown has now been viewed 65,000 times. Now, just think about that. I mean, that is absolutely awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And of course, I think it explains very well why Dr. Brown refuses to debate me again. He knows, and people have told me who have been followers of his ministry for years have told me in private correspondence they have never seen Dr. Brown so bamboozled, so confused, so uncertain of himself, and so self-contradictory in all of the years they've been following him. And that as a result of the debates, they have now begun to study covenant eschatology. So this type of thing, it just keeps going on and on and on. The impact of it, William, you and I had about a 3-hour debate on Thursday night of last week. And the comments that have been posted on YouTube, the viewership on my YouTube page has not been tremendous. I mean, it's not in the 400 or 500 count, but it's gaining attention more and more as the days go by. And the comments there are very, very encouraging of people that could see right straight through the approach that our opponents in that debate took, their evasiveness, their refusal to deal with the arguments that we actually made. And when we would just literally just read the scriptures to them, and their only response to our reading the scripture was, "That cannot be true." And you're going, all I did was read it. Why can't it be true? So the result of this kind of exchange, it continues to bear fruit over time, and who knows what fruit it will bear in the months, the weeks, the months, even the years that are ahead. That even after we are gone, people will still be able to watch things and to listen to the message and to see the utter failure of our opponents, whether that's the Hebrew Israelite people or these historic premillennials that we debated on Thursday night, or whoever it might be. I noticed also the gentleman by the name of Wallace, was it Brian Wallace, I think, something like that, in Salt Lake City that I debated a couple of years ago. That's now been viewed over 25,000 times. And I get some absolutely amazing emails and comments as a result of that debate, even to this day. So like I said, these debates will continue to do good for many, many times to come.
That's exactly correct. And, what amazing opportunities people have to not just pick up a book and read it, which is great, but now they have an opportunity to see in, living color exchanges between both sides and how they are handled. That's of inestimable value to people who will be studying in the future. So they can actually see the nuances involved in how these responses are done. So they're not only debates and learning, but they're like, mini seminars for people on how to handle these things in the future and what they'll be facing in the future.
It's equipping those who are already convinced of covenant eschatology, like you said. It gives them ammunition. It gives them the answers, so that when they go out and engage with their friends, when they engage with their pastors, when they engage with their enemies, then they're better equipped. It is literally an incredible resource that is being provided for the broader preterist community. And so it's not only something that we feel like personally is accomplishing good at the time that we do it, but it's doing good for the broader preterist community.
That's exactly right. So, it was great. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to ask you to share with us a few of your thoughts on the debate that you and I had on Thursday night that I've already mentioned. You and I both, we corresponded and we talked on the phone about it, and email and everything. It was a very enjoyable debate. And one of the comments that I have read repeatedly on my YouTube channel where it can be found, and by the way, folks, Alan Morton, who is just absolutely so fantastic, he has already organized that debate into affirmatives, negatives, Q's, and A's, and cut out a lot of the superfluous stuff. He has not cut out any content, mind you, okay, but he's cut out a lot of empty space and empty time, and it's now on my YouTube channel where you can go there and just watch it in order, in a very highly organized way. And he will be sending me, by the way, MP3s or even videos, DVDs of that debate that for my own personal archives. And I suppose if anybody wants them, they can purchase them from me as well. But one of the comments that I started to say here that I've read over and over and over was that the decorum of that debate was so wonderful that neither side lost their cool, neither side got ugly. There was no name calling. We both know that Michael Holloway, bless his heart, he got really caught up in the moment, so to speak, later on during the debate. But after the debate, he sent an apology to you. He sent an apology to me for being so aggressive. Well, you just got to appreciate that spirit. You've got to appreciate that attitude. And so that's something that has really been commented on by the people who have watched the debate, that it enhances the ability to learn. It enhances the environment. You know, you don't have to bleep things out.
No,
like evidently you almost had to do on Friday night with the Hebrew Israelite guys. And I am just staggered. And I received an email or two today from people thanking me for your decorum and mine. I don't know if they contacted you today or not, but they were both very, very complimentary on us conducting ourselves as Christian gentlemen. Might have been yesterday, I don't know. Anyway, but the point of fact is they were impressed with our decorum and how it's just so conducive to learning when you can listen to both sides and you don't have to listen around to all this nonsense. And, you know, these people that contacted me that are posting on YouTube have been able to see so clearly that our opponents were absolutely doing their best to avoid the arguments that we were making. They were literally denying the overt statements of Scripture. I mean, one of the things that stands out to me among many, you know, there were several different times when you would make arguments, and either Jomo or Michael would just simply say, well, that simply cannot be true. That simply cannot be true. And they wouldn't tell us why it couldn't be true, or they would give their presuppositional idea of why it can't be true, but they would never provide solid biblical exegesis. But one of the outstanding comments and moments in the debate, to me, was when Michael kept talking about, well, you know, the atonement was completed. Sins were forgiven at the cross. And I pointed out that entrance into the most holy place, which is only available through forgiveness, would only come when the wrath of God was completed. The wrath of God would be completed in the pouring out of God's wrath in the 7 bowls. The 7th bowl would be poured out on Babylon. Babylon was Old Covenant Jerusalem. And as you remember, William, Michael Holloway admitted, reluctantly, but he admitted that Babylon was Old Covenant Jerusalem. And then I pointed out that since the wrath of God was fulfilled in the judgment of Babylon, i.e. Jerusalem, and that no man could enter the most holy place until the 7th bowl of God's wrath was poured out, that meant that no man could enter into the most holy place until the fall of Jerusalem. And all that Michael could do is to say, that can't be true. That simply cannot be true. Well, folks, that doesn't prove anything. I mean, I'm sorry. You can say that can't be true 100,000 times, but it doesn't change what the Bible says. And of course,
well,
I thought it was. I thought. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to that as far as a couple of highlights that I thought, and both of these came from Jomo Thomas when he was listening to that exchange that you just got through relating, especially when you began talking about the high priest going, you know, Hebrews 9 and the high priest going into the most holy place, referring it back to Leviticus 16, where he had to change his earthly garments, wash, and then put on the linen garments, the holy garments, garments of glory, and go into the holy place where he became as an angel of God or as God, you know, as the typology indicates. And when you finished that, he said, "Oh wow, man, that was beautiful. That was beautiful. Yeah." So you know, he got excited about that, and of course, that's something we're excited about too, because I love that typology.
Yeah. I love that stuff.
Yes.
And he said, let me interject this. He said that was not only beautiful. I don't disagree with a single word that was said there. And then he said something stunningly. He said, but that has nothing to do with eschatology. And you and I both are going, what? And
absolutely.
To follow up on that, I could not help but think, William, that if any of our opponents on Facebook who just condemn us for saying that Christ divested himself of his physical flesh and blood body when he entered into the most holy place, if they were listening to Jomo Thomas when he said that was beautiful, I agree with every word of that, they must have been just flipping out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It was a fantastic moment.
Yeah, I thought another interesting point was when we were discussing Genesis, and we were talking about the tree of life, talking about death, having been a part of the natural creation, and what happened to Adam, whether or not he had immortality. He was made outside the garden, separate and apart from the tree of life, which was there for immortality based upon the narrative. And then he gets cast out. And, Michael Holloway was saying one thing, but, Jomo Thomas admitted that the tree was there for immortality, and apparently he didn't eat of it, and therefore couldn't have had immortality while he was in the garden. So that was another.
I thought that was fantastic, because you primarily took the lead in that little discourse there. I threw in a couple of comments from time to time, but I thought the fact that they contradicted themselves on that was so extremely telling. And finally, when I made the comment, I think it was Michael Holloway tried to make an argument, or you shall begin to die, and dying you shall die, and that meant they would begin to die. And when I pointed out that just simply is not linguistically supported, and I pointed them toward the article by Dr. Dallas Burdett, and that article is on my website on donkpreston.com, in which Dr. Burdett just demonstrates powerfully, effectively, linguistically, and grammatically that the text does not say you'll begin to die. And Michael Holloway just almost threw up his hands and said, well, I'm not going to argue about that anymore. I'm just not going to argue about that anymore. And it's like, whoa, okay. You tried to make an argument. Now it blew up in your face. So you don't want to talk about it anymore. So, yeah, I thought that was a really great moment. And another point that was humorous. Now, how totally substantive it is, I don't know, but it has certainly made some impact on people on Facebook, or YouTube, I should say. If you remember, Michael Holloway said, I don't know of a single time, and he said, I keep asking my family to show me a single time. He said, but I make the point that any time and every single time a New Testament writer quotes from an Old Testament prophecy, they're quoting it as if it was fulfilled. It's already fulfilled. It's not going to be fulfilled. And I said, that's not going to work at all, because Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 quotes from Isaiah chapter 25 and verse 8. He quotes from Hosea chapter 13, verse 8, Hosea 13, verse 14. That's the resurrection text. And, I just forgotten the third passage that I quoted. Might have been Daniel, but I made the point. If you're going to say that every single time a New Testament writer quotes from an Old Testament prophecy, and to say it was already fulfilled, you've just become a full preterist. And I thought he was going to fall out of his chair. And on YouTube, I keep saying Facebook, but on YouTube, person after person commented on that and saying, I nearly fell over laughing when Preston nailed them and said he had become a full preterist. And like I say, I agree it's probably not the most exegetically based argument, so it's not the most substantive article that could have been made, but it does show the fallacy of his hermeneutic.
Yes.
And he admitted to you early on in the debate how much of the old law has been completely fulfilled, and he said every jot and every tittle. And I'm going, the debate's over. I mean, my goodness. And, there were so many times the one drawback that we had in that debate, obviously, even though it went for 3 hours, is the time limitations for answering and the rapid-fire nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you encountered it. I sensed your frustration. I know I was frustrated because they would bring up so many points, and you simply could not get to every single point you wanted to make in response. And that's just the nature of debate. I mean, that's literally just the nature of debate. And so, in retrospect, you'll think about something that your opponent said, and you'll say, "Oh, I didn't cover that." Well, I covered 3,500 other items they brought up, and I didn't cover that one. So it is frustrating, but that point alone, I thought about it after the debate was over, and we touched on it periodically, but never in depth. We admittedly never held their feet to the fire on that point when Michael admitted that every single prophecy of the Old Testament stands fulfilled. I mean, in the first place, that is not the standard historic premillennial view. That is more of an amillennial view, as you well know. It is not the standard view of the historic premillennial camp. Not even close to it. So I was really quite stunned when Michael Holloway said what he did, and then followed that up later in the debate by saying there's not a single place in the New Testament where a New Testament writer quotes an Old Testament text that he's not saying had already been fulfilled. I mean, that is not the standard paradigm of historic premillennialism. Historic premillennialism very, very often appeals to the Old Testament prophecies for the restoration of Israel, for instance, the salvation of Israel, the Messianic temple, and on and on and on it goes. So, pardon me, I was somewhat shocked, somewhat surprised when I heard them make statements like that, because it just didn't jive with what they told us about their own supposed eschatological viewpoint.
Yeah, that is so true. And, after you left the debate, there was just a little bit of continued discussion going on. And, one of them, as they had tried to deny that the term all meant all several times. And, of course, they went back to that issue on the redemption being completed. And so I just walked them through Ephesians 1, 7, 13, 14, and 28, verse 30, along with Luke 21, 28, to point out the arabon and the earnest of the inheritance until the redemption. And then the last thing I think that I recall was going back to the prophecy in Deuteronomy 18 about Christ, where Moses said that a prophet would be raised up and that they had to hear all things, whatever he said to them, and then showed from Acts 3 that this was the restoration of the kingdom to Israel, based on Acts 1:6 and the correlation with Acts chapter 3, and that it was in those days, and all the prophets had spoken of it, and it resulted in turning them away from iniquity. He didn't have much to say about that when I was done, and someone wrote and said, well, you just killed everything he said about, all not meaning all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, like you said, it was a good. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, yeah, their argument on attempting to redefine all by their appeal to John 12:17, if I remember correctly, him appealing, I think it was John 12:17. But,
yeah.
This is, as I pointed out, this is what's known as an illegitimate transfer of illegitimate totality transfer, and that term could actually be modified. But what that means, ladies and gentlemen, in the world of logic is a person, you're exegeting a single text here, and a person goes to another completely, totally different context and finds that text, that word used in another context where it's used in a different way, and they take that different definition and they impose it. They transfer that context onto the context under consideration. And I will give you an illustration of an illegitimate totality transfer. Just this week, I was corresponding with a gentleman on Facebook, and I was pointing out where Jesus was talking about the destruction of the temple. And this individual came back and said, well, Jesus was not talking about a physical temple. He was talking about a spiritual temple. And I said, you cannot be serious. I said, Jesus was standing in the temple. Was he standing in a spiritual temple? He predicted that not one stone of that temple would be left standing on top of another. And the disciples began to show him the size and the beauty and the glory of those stones. And you're telling me that's a spiritual temple? How did they show him the size and the beauty of spiritual stones? And this individual runs over to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. Ye therefore as living stones are being built up. And he said, see, here are living stones and a spiritual temple. I said, good grief. I said, that is a horrible hermeneutic. You are clearly talking about a spiritual temple versus a literal physical temple. I said, you have to prove your case without perverting the context. And, I mean, it was like beating my head against a wall. It did not matter what the text of Matthew chapter 24 said. He would then run to Ephesians chapter 2 and said, see, there's foundation stone. There's the chief cornerstone. Are you going to tell me that's literal physical? Dude, I never said any such thing. I mean, again, here's a guy with a presuppositional approach to the scriptures that absolutely refuses to honor any kind of context.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, I just got a book in on Greek. It's intermediate New Testament Greek by Richard A. Young. And in the preface to the book, he talks about the historical context of words versus the descriptive school. And one of the things that he says about it is the descriptive school, on the other hand, recognizes that usage in context determines meaning, not prior usage. So in other words, he points out the fallacy of basically going and finding a word somewhere in a historical setting and looking at the way it's used in that historical setting and then bringing that definition back into a contextual setting where the word appears in another place. He said that's a fallacy in studying the Greek. He says you need to define the word and understand it in that particular context in which it is used. And so I'm looking forward to studying through this. But I thought that was impressive because I know a lot of times people will say, well, this word is used this way, it's used that way, it's used that way, and they try to bring those arbitrary definitions into the context at hand. And there is, some legitimacy to that, but it needs to be a similar context used in the same way as opposed to going out and maybe finding the word, talking about bicycles or something, if you please, and then bringing it back and imposing it on, on the text. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, and that's such a critical point, and that's one of the reasons why on this program, ladies and gentlemen, we talk about hermeneutic a lot. We may be exegeting a given text. We spent a good long time on Isaiah chapter 2 through 4 as we talked about about the Messianic temple. And we very, very, very often talked about hermeneutic. And what we mean by that is the science of interpretation and the fact that we must use the good, solid principles of logic, good, solid principles of interpretation in order to understand these Old Testament texts. And we must see how the New Testament writers use them, and we must conflate and we must harmonize. I thought one of the amazing things that was said in the debate on Thursday night, William, was that when Michael said that we do nothing but interpret the New Testament through the Old, and I go, we do no such thing, but. Neither do we eliminate, exclude, and deny what the Old Testament says. And when the Old Testament tells us that the following would be in the last days, and I didn't say this specifically, but to make the point, when an Old Testament writer tells us that a given thing will happen in the last days, then we don't come to the New Testament and say, well, that wouldn't happen in the last days. No, we accept the time frame. We can accept the New Testament interpretation of the nature of those things, but that's what you call a holistic approach. That's accepting the testimony of both the Old Testament and the New. And that's proper hermeneutic. And to make the point that I made in the debate, that Paul in Romans chapter 11, and I was literally staggered when Michael Holloway said Paul was not quoting from Isaiah 27:9 and following in Romans chapter 11. Well, I can tell you right now, you won't be able to find 2 or 3 scholars in all the world who would take that position. That is a given in biblical scholarship. So anyway, I took note of the fact that Paul in Romans chapter 11, 26 and 27, quoted from Isaiah chapter 27 to predict the time of Israel's salvation. By this I shall take away their sin. Well, in Isaiah chapter 27, it tells us that Israel's sin would be taken away by or at the time of her judgment, when the fortified city would be destroyed, when the temple would be destroyed, when the altar would be turned to chalkstone, when the people whom God had created would receive mercy no more, which, by the way, is taken directly from Deuteronomy 32:28 and following, that this is a people of no understanding, and that in Israel's last days, that people of no understanding would be judged. So we have this consistent use of the last days, the prediction of Israel's salvation at the time of Israel's judgment. And here is Michael Holloway going, Paul's not quoting Isaiah chapter 27. And once again, you won't find, you can probably name the number of scholars who would agree with Michael on that on one hand and have 3 fingers left. You might not have any fingers left, because I'm telling you, virtually nobody denies that Paul was quoting Isaiah chapter 27. And then, of course, Michael's ultimate argument was that you're interpreting the New Testament through the Old. Well, what we're doing is we are allowing the testimony of Isaiah to stand unless Paul denies it, unless Paul redefines it. And, of course, I didn't have time to do it on the program the other night during that debate, but one of the things that a person can do is go through the entirety of Romans chapters 10 and 11 and show that in one passage after another, whether it is Psalm 68, whether it's Isaiah chapter 10, whether it's Isaiah 65, or, Isaiah 27, Isaiah 59, passage after passage after passage. Virtually every passage that Paul quotes in Romans chapter 10 and 11 contains a prophecy of the salvation of Israel at the time of the judgment of Israel. But Michael Holloway's hermeneutic has to be, we must reject that united testimony of every one of the Old Testament prophecies that Paul quotes. Ignore the testimony. Ignore that every single one of those quotes put the salvation of Israel that Paul was predicting. Every one of those prophecies put that salvation in the context of judgment. I'm sorry, that's not a good hermeneutic. Furthermore, it really objectively denies the fact that Paul said that his eschatological hope was nothing but the hope of Israel found in the Old Testament. Let's not forget, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend is coming up July the 11th through the 13th. I mentioned earlier the fellow from New Jersey. He's already got his plans made to come. We've already got some reservations in from different people. We are in the process of making the arrangements for discounted rates for the hotels that are surrounding there. So I want everyone to try to make your plans to be with us for Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. Our theme this year is how we know we're not living in the last days. You're going to have lessons from Michael Miano, Rod MacArthur, who hasn't been with us in a couple of years, and this will be Michael Miano's very first year to speak for us. A guy named William Bell will be one of our speakers. I don't have a clue what topics are going to be. He hasn't told me yet, in spite of the fact. Yeah. Well, just in case you would even dare to think about it, William, Don Preston's lessons will be a song of the last days. And you know where I'm going with that.
Oh, yes.
So,
well, no problem with that. I can work around it.
Yeah, you stay away from that. But anyway, well, here we've taken up the time this evening, William, sharing our past week. Really, boy, it was a full weekend for you. That's to be sure. And that's right. But folks, by the way, let me just mention this because I've been having several of you contact me asking me when my book on the death of Adam and the life of Christ is going to be finished. I've been announcing that for a good little while, and I went back over the last couple of weeks. I've been doing a little bit more additional writing. I've been doing a little bit of additional editing. I'm waiting on a foreword from somebody that we will not name, but his initials are William Bell. So, eventually I'll get that, I think. But
you will.
Yeah. But anyway, I just want to let those of you who have asked me about that book and have asked, hey, you said you were going to hopefully have that published by April. And so here we are in April, and we're closer, I can assure you. But there were some things that I wanted to add to it, that I wanted to add to the content of the book that I just felt were just revelatory in regard to what other people are saying about the death of Adam and the life of Christ. And these things are stunning. I mean, when you have people saying that the death of Adam was not to be overcome for those in Christ at the parousia, I mean, that's unprecedented in history for anyone to claim that. I've been going back through my commentaries just real quickly here, and I've got a bunch of them in my library, and I've been reading commentator after commentator after commentator. I have not found even one commentator who even remotely suggested that the death of Adam would not be abolished at the coming of the Lord. Now, they may put that coming of the Lord in our future, but they understand that the death of Adam would be overcome for those in Christ at the coming of the Lord. And yet, I'm having a written formal debate, and my opponent, Ed Stevens, adamantly denies that the death of Adam was to be abolished for those in Christ at the coming of the Lord. I mean, when I read that, I was literally speechless. I copied and pasted it. I sent it to William, and I said something like, I know that all of us are human beings. I know that we sometimes fail to see our own fallacies and our own weaknesses. I understand all of that. But I said something like, how in the name of reason could anyone deny that the death of Adam would be abolished for those in Christ at the parousia? Paul said the last enemy to be destroyed is death, and the only death in the entire discussion is Adamic death. So how do you deny that? I'm just simply stunned. So I had to go back and add some of that material to my book, and I think that if you get the book when it comes out, I think you'll see how devastating it is for someone to deny what Paul had to say. And with that, folks, thanks so much for joining us for this evening's Two Guys in a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. William, is always great to hear what's going on in your world and to be on this program with you. Always enjoy it so very much. Folks, thanks again for being with us. And with that, I'm going to say good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.